Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is Wednesday evening. Welcome to my show. This is Scotty Roberts, and this is what would you call me? The forerunner, the voice in the wilderness, calling out the new program, which starts on Monday, the 19th, nationally syndicated Odyssey Network with the Intrepid Radio program, which is this show, just utilizing an older name for this show that I did with John Ward several years ago. So welcome to my show tonight, and I appreciate it. I love the fact that you're here. There's Audrey. Good to see you, Audrey. Woohoo is right. And what did she say there? Oh, hello, Cannoli. Yes, that name sticks, and it will still be my name forevermore. I want to share something with you before we go too much further. My son, Flynn, who is turning 10 years old in about another week, he was just out of Cub Scout camp. And he did something I have always said about guns in America, is that it's all about education. If you raise your kids to know what guns are about, to why we have the freedom to own them and possess them, and how to fire them, how to make them work, that's going to be something, a responsibility that they realize as they grow up that they have. And if you have guns, you know, what's the old line from Spider-Man? With great power comes great responsibility. And I think that's the same with owning a gun. While the Constitution doesn't give us a right to own our guns, it protects what they called, the founders, our God-given right to possess a firearm. And remember, I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but it's worth repeating that constitutional amendment wasn't put in the Constitution to protect squirrel hunting, deer hunting, and target practice. And it wasn't only meant for muskets, though that's all they had at the time. That was meant as, according to the founders, if you look at the Federalist Papers and a lot of the writings thereafter of the founders, the Second Amendment was there for the purpose of securing a people against the possible rise of tyranny in this country. And so that they had if you will, advanced than a firelock musket. There were cannons, of course, and things like that. There were navies, there were armies. But look at what the United States did in its colonial times to win its independence from England. They did it with the ragtag armies. They did it with firelock muskets. And, of course, that's what they were fighting on the other side. But people throw up the, what I would like to say is the red herring or the straw dog into the argument that says, well, you know, we can't arm ourselves as citizenry beyond in an ability to defend ourselves against us. We can't arm ourselves with nuclear weapons. But I will tell you something, is that we have the right to do so. We have the right to arm ourselves. Let's just leave it at that. What's shaking? That's my desk. Sorry. I get excited and I move my feet, or I bounce in my chair, or I shake my desk. Things like that. I've got to keep my hands off my desk when I do that. Sorry, Iowa. I didn't mean to scare you. And so I bring that all up because my son, in his scout camp, they have marksmanship. And he can win a badge for his marksmanship. And now this is only done with BB guns. They don't put real guns in their hands yet at age 9. But I just wanted to share this with you. My son showed this to me. Look at that grouping. That is my son Flynn's target, his shots, and he's actually got 2 of them here. That was the first one. Here's the second one. Look at that. So there you go. That's my son. I had him at camp last summer, and he did about the same. And my wife had him at camp this summer, and that's his shots right there. There you go. There's the backside. Kind of see the shadows there a little better. So that's my son learning how to use his weapon. And he doesn't know this yet, but I'm going to make sure he's not listening out there. They're just getting ready for bed out there. But his pellet guns, rifles, like the Red Ranger in the Christmas Story, that kind of a thing. So he's going to be very excited about that. And yes, I have taught him well, Roger. I have indeed. So yeah, nice shooting. You must be a Flynn. And Iowa X, are you a Flynn? That would be interesting. Hello to everybody who's come in. Is it just me, or do I sound kind of far away? Let me check something. I want to make sure. I noticed this when I listened back to a segment of last night's show. Aha! Here we go. Now, that ought to change for you. How's that? Is that any better? I had this set on my internal microphone instead of my studio mic. There we go. That should sound a little better for you. All right. I noticed that listening back last night, and it's usually automatic. But now since I updated my system over the weekend, I've got to remember to go in and double check that stuff because it's not all preset anymore. Sounds the same to you, huh? Can you hear this if I tap on the mic? Can you guys hear that? If you can't hear that, then my mic is not picking it up. I'm just double checking my settings here. Not at all on the tapping. So I think probably because I started this broadcast with the wrong microphone hooked up in my system, that may be what we're stuck with tonight. There's no way to change it in here now. Buffering is all on that end, but no tapping. Okay, sorry about that. So you are hearing me a little distant tonight because you're picking me up on down there instead of this one. Technical live scintillating radio again. The buffering's gone. The buffering will come back. I did call, who reminded me? Michelle reminded me, I think it was, to call my internet company today, and they did find some problems, but it's next week before they can get out and fix it. That's just the way it is. Frontier. So that will be fixed eventually. This whole buffering thing, I think, is coming from that. So, okay, so my mic is working, but I'm on the wrong mic. I don't think this one's doing anything right now. So that's too bad. But you're still picking me up. You can still hear me. That's all right. So tonight, I wanted to get back into the Cain and the other people, which we started to dig into it a little more. And if I can refresh your memories, and for those of you who weren't here, we were talking about Cain, the son of Adam and Eve, and how he murdered his brother Abel according to the biblical story. Now, the first thing, the caveat I have to put in here is, if you believe this story by faith, that is something you choose to do. That's your faith. You can look at these stories from one of several directions. You can say, this is fact. I believe what the Bible says in its English version without digging too deep, and what my church tells me to believe, and the story's true. That's one way. You can look at it and say, these are allegorical stories. These are fables. This is biblical mythology. These are stories to establish faith. Those are other ways of looking at this. You can look at it and say these are completely false stories that were added in there to build up a faith story by the people who wrote the story. Be it Moses, if this is Genesis, it's supposed to have been Moses. I don't see any reason to disbelieve that Moses existed. And you all know that from other series that I've taught on here. Moses, I think, was as mythological as was Muhammad and other great religious leaders. I think he founded Judaism. I think he may have written down the account as he knew them. He wrote down these stories. I believe he built Judaism, codified it, out of whole cloth and created Judaism. At the same time, I think he incorporated other stories that were more foreign to Israel, to the Hebrews. I think he incorporated other creation stories and myths. It's positive. He incorporated the stories of the Mesopotamians, the Sumer Akkadians, the stories of the Anunnaki, of Elil and Enki and Ea, and all these different characters. And he tied them into, eventually they got tied into Canaanite culture, which picked up the names and made their own names for God, and so on. So that's all right, Susie, that you're late. No big deal. We're just getting rolling. What does Iowa say? Do you have those Mediacom bastards? I'm not sure what you're referring to there. Something I obviously should know by the term you're using. I'm not sure what that is. Mediacom bastards. Are you talking about my microphone? Mediacom? Maybe. Let me know. So, this story of Cain and Abel being the first two sons of Adam and Eve, according to the biblical tale. Let's do this so I don't have to say in accordance with the biblical mythology, or according to the story that Moses wrote, or according to the biblical account of creation. Instead of saying all of those cumbersome phrases throughout, we're just going to call this biblical mythology. And that's the way we'll proceed with this. So in accordance with biblical mythology, Cain and Abel were the first two sons of Adam and Eve. In accordance with other religions and other religious mythology, the first family always had multiples during that first birth experience, be they twins, triplets, quadruplets, quintuplets, sextuplets. They're in all the different accounts of creation first families. And so I believe where the Bible doesn't call them twins, I believe that they were twins in accordance with the mythology. And so Cain and Abel, they grow up. Cain is a husbandman. He is out tilling the ground, planting his crops, obviously so his the family can eat. They all can eat. Abel is raising flocks of sheep and probably goats and things like that. And when it comes to sacrifice time, because God, Elohim, at that time required a blood sacrifice, which was a precursor to temple worship in Israel, that he would bring a lamb and sacrifice it, shed its blood, sacrifice it to God. And it was a sweet savor to the nostrils of God. While Cain brought the first fruits of his year's hard labor in the fields, planting food, and offered the food, the first fruits. And God rejected him because it was not blood. That tonight, that's his territory with that, where he talks about the bloody sacrifices. This is the God that was ruling over Adam and Eve. He required blood, and he required killing in order to appease him. Whereas Cain couldn't offer the first fruits of his hard labor. All Abel had to do was take one sheep, cut its throat, shed the blood, burn it on the altar. He was done, and his sins were washed away for the year. And but Cain either had to go buy one, but God said your sacrifice is not acceptable. And of course, Cain got a little pissy about this. And then what happens? God comes to Cain and tells Cain, he says, Cain, I know where your head is. You're getting pissed at your brother. Don't take it out on your brother's sins laying at the door. Don't act on this thing that's in your heart. So God warns Cain, don't do what's in your heart. Meanwhile, we don't hear anything about God speaking to Abel. He doesn't warn Abel as far as we know. At least it's not in the story. He doesn't go to Abel and say, Abel, your brother Cain is planning to kill you. So be careful. Watch yourself. Set up your protections. We don't know if that happened or not. Wasn't in the story of this biblical myth. Now, that also brings about, the earmarks of biblical mythology. You've got the God coming down, talking to the man, but he's not talking to the other guy. He's just talking to the guy. This is the guy that's the main character in this account. So God's talking to him. Now, remember, I also said, Cain is the offspring of Eve and Nakash, the serpent character in the Garden of Eden, while Abel is the offspring of Adam and Eve. So you've got these twin brothers, one fathered by Nakash, one of the Elohim. So that making pretty much Cain being one of the offspring, the hybrid offspring, if you will. Not hybrid because he could reproduce, but one of the offspring of the intermingling of the sons of God, or the B'nai Ha-Elohim, which is what Nakash was, one of the Elohim, and a human woman. Maybe that's why God talked to him. But remember, God also talked to Adam. He also talked to Eve. So these are the very early days of creation. Somewhere along the way, God stopped talking to humans. And it might have started right back with Cain, because he talked to Cain, but he didn't talk to Abel. He told Cain to not sin. He didn't tell Abel to watch out for his brother who's going to kill him. So what eventually happens? Cain kills Abel. God comes down, obviously knowing the whole story, and it's kind of a conversational setup, because God asks, Cain, where's your brother Abel? It's kind of like when my kids do something wrong, like, okay, not real wrong, but let's use a lame example. My kids draw all over my computer screen with lipstick. Like that hasn't happened. And I'll come in and I'll see my kids. I'll go, hey, Ellery, what happened to my computer screen? You don't know of anybody who would color on my computer screen with lipstick, do you? Same question as Cain. Where's your brother Abel? So, according to this biblical myth, God already knew what was going on. And so what is Cain's famous response? He says, I don't know where Abel is. Am I my brother's keeper? And my brother's keeper being the phrase. It's been used many, many times over the centuries for things. So can you really blame God, says Iowa? The more people you know, the less you want to talk. Yeah, ain't that the truth? That's a good way to look at it. We used to say, I used to look at God and the way God interacted with humans. Now, though, this is back when I was in. And then we look at what we called dispensations or covenants. There were covenants, there were dispensations. And we used to call it stair-step dispensationalism. Like that. Creation, and the farther you got away from creation, the higher the dispensation became. And the higher the qualifications necessary to reach God. And so you have all these covenants that went through the Old Testament. The Adamic covenant, the Noahic covenant, the Abrahamic covenant, and so on and so forth. And so here's what Cain says. He says, my brother's keeper. And then God immediately turns on him and says, the blood of your brother cries up from the ground against you. And Cain goes through this whole thing where, well, now if people find me, surely they're going to know I've done this thing and they're going to kill me. So God says, I'll put a mark on you so nobody will kill you. And he kicks him out of the garden and he goes east to the land of Nod. And the interesting thing that Cain asks, this is the question that really started my question on this article that I wrote for this book, Cain and the Other People. Who are the other people who Cain is afraid will see him and recognize him as a murderer? He doesn't say, my family's going to recognize me. And that's the only people there. According to the biblical account, So far, Adam, Eve, Cain, and Abel. Abel's dead. 3 people. But what if they did have other kids and they're grown as well? How far along is this into the life of Cain and Abel? They make it sound in the account like this is the first time that Cain and Abel offered up offerings to God. Because God said, well, Abel's is good. He shed blood. Cain's is not. He brought me vegetables. Now, did Cain and Abel do this for years and years and years and years and years and years as their extended family grew? Or was there a point where we have to realize, even in the mythology, this is the first time this is being done? And God says, unacceptable to Cain, acceptable to Abel. Cain gets pissed off, kills his brother. So it's very early on in their human experience. So is Cain, when he says other people will see me and will want to kill me for this, who's he talking about? Are the other people his mom and dad? Who are they? Are the other people his brothers and sisters? Well, no, because it's very interesting. Right after this, after Cain leaves the region of Eden, goes east to Nod, God's marked him, Abel's dead. It says there's almost this bittersweet little story where it says that Eve bore a 3rd son to Adam, and she named him Seth. And it says, I've called him Seth because God has given me a man-child to replace my lost son, Abel. So that's kid number 3, which, according to the biblical account, takes place after Cain leaves Eden and heads east to Nod. So if you start putting these things together in their own context, there's nobody else on earth except Adam, Eve, Cain, and now the new son, Seth, is going to be born. Abel's got a chicken scratch through him. Gone. So it says Cain leaves the region of Eden and he goes east to Nod and marries a wife. And they have a child. And the name was not, which was later on. This is a different Enoch. This is Cain's son. And it says he built a city and named the city after his son, Enoch. And we went through some of the linguistics, how the E in ancient linguistics of this region, E could be pronounced U. The N can be converted to an R. And the CH, of course, is K. And so the pronunciation of Enoch was Uruk. And Uruk is the ancient word for Iraq, meaning first city, beautiful city. So when Cain built Uruk, Uruk was the first city, the first place, the first dwelling, the first establishment that became the first beautiful city. So this is where we got to last time in this article. Cain saying, my brother's keeper, so on and so forth. As the story goes on, by the way, here's what the biblical passage says about God coming to Cain. It's very interesting that God came down and communicated with his created beings, but that he did nothing to hinder the upcoming savage murder of Abel. He could talk to the future. Now, we don't know how Cain killed him. He didn't shoot him. Did he stab him? Did he crack him over the head with a rock? He bash his skull in with the skull of a goat? Were goats even on the earth that long to have died and left skeletons? We don't know. All we know is he killed him. And God could talk to the future murderer Cain, but didn't do absolutely anything as recorded to warn Abel. And while this is really, on my part, a subjective observation, it's really noteworthy that there was such an incredible physical, audio, visual interplay. Yet the only thing God did to assuage Cain's anger prior to the murder was to warn him that he needed to cool his jets and not give sin an opportunity to take hold of him. Then the Lord God said to Cain, "Why are you angry? Why is your face downcast? If you do what's right, will you not be accepted? But if you don't do what's right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it." This is what God says to Cain. And there's only a warning given to not let his emotions run away with him. But then there's the harsh judgment from the same creator who talked with him face to face. Consider what it would be like as you proceed through life if the creator of the universe interacted with you on this personal basis, telling you to be careful of this or that. Cain must have had a really special place in the eyes of God in context with this story. For we don't read anything of the same sort of interaction between God and Abel. Cain was warned not to let sin take him over, but Abel didn't hear a single word about protecting himself from his brother's anger, at least not that is recorded for us. Be it a truthful event we're reading about or a fictional tale. According to this passage, God's human creation was in such infancy that the rudiments of committing murder and then the seeming inability to grasp its consequences tells the tale of a very young civilization with very little experience in dealing with the harsh realities of human interaction, such as murder. Yet for some reason, God kept focusing on Cain, the murderer, prior to the murder, and then afterwards. It's kind of like your little kids. When your little kids, they walk around and they have no concept of cause and effect, or they're just starting to get the rudiments of it. They certainly have not developed the finely honed conscience of an adult. A kid could come along and I don't know, smack their little brother in the head and take his candy from him, just keep walking and not have compassion, not have conscience about it. Oh, it's the candy. He wanted the candy. And all I had to do is push my little brother over and take it from him. It's mine. That's civilization in its infancy. And as the story goes, Cain, in jealousy of his twin brother's position with God and in anger over his own rejection by the deity, took his brother out to the field and murdered him. So cause and effect, the consequence of the first murder. When God asked Cain about the incident and the whereabouts of Abel, Cain uttered that famous question, "I don't know where he is. Am I my brother's keeper?" As a result, God branded Cain with a mark and banished him from the region of Eden. If you're followers of the show Supernatural, remember the episodes with Cain? He had the mark of Cain. We don't know what the mark of Cain was. We don't know if it was just like a branding, or a tattooing, or a disfiguration of some sort, or some kind of, who knows, esoteric magical spell that was visible on his body. We don't know. But as a result, we're told that Adam and Eve bore their third son, Seth, and Eve held him up as a replacement from God for her murdered son. And this is the Genesis account of the aftermath of Cain's murder of Abel. Now, listen to this. Take specific note of the emotions such as they're recorded of Cain. Then take note of what God did by way of judgment and how Cain reacted. The passage says, "The Lord God said, 'What have you done? Listen, your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. Now you're under a curse and driven from the ground, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you work the ground, it will no longer yield its crops for you. You will be a restless wanderer on the earth.' Cain said to the Lord, 'My punishment is more than I can bear. Today you're driving me from the land, and I will be hidden from your presence I will be a restless wanderer on the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me. Listen to that pathos. A couple of things come to mind, and maybe this is my own 21st century interpretation of the emotions going on here, of the interactions. But my thinking is, it's God here, you ask. Well, if they're both bringing their sacrifices to God, and God says, Abel's is acceptable, but Cain, yours isn't, and Cain gets pissy about it, he gets angry, kills his brother. What does he know of murder at this point, we're to ask? At the same time, if God had set up no prescription as to how to carry out the sacrifice and the giving and the so on, how was Cain supposed to know ahead of time, or Abel supposed to know, what it was exactly they were supposed to be giving? So here you have Cain committing an act of sin against God, but God, apparently, at least according to the story, never spelled out what his prescription was for him. Rules, here's how it works. Now, maybe he came down afterwards and said, I told you, you got to bring me a sacrifice. I didn't mean vegetables. I meant blood. I'm God. I need blood. So Cain does the wrong thing and ends up murdering his brother as a result, out of jealousy, out of bitterness, out of anger. That doesn't sound like a very emotionally mature response. When you are angry about something and you're jealous that the next guy got looked at better, more favorably than you, what do? Do you go home and find a way to improve your next shot? Or do you go out and murder that person? I think I'll just eliminate the object of my shame, my embarrassment, my humiliation, my anger, my bitterness, my jealousy. Gone. This is what Cain did. And so he murders his brother. And God comes and talks to him. God banishes him. He banishes Cain from the region of Eden. And Cain's very concerned that if he's found by other people, he's going to be executed. He knew that much. Why did he think that? Why did he say, you know what? If I kill my brother Abel, I'm going to be killed in return. Did he know that much because he was worried about it? Are these the holes in the story that we're seeing? If Cain knew that these were the consequences, why did he do what he did? Well, obviously a crime of passion, a crime of rage, a crime of hate, a crime of anger. But what crimes don't involve any of those things? If you bring it up to modern context, all of those things are involved in crime. So while there's no civilized system of jurisprudence in place, Cain has this very strong belief that his life is forfeit for killing his brother Abel. Well, who's going to kill him? Eve? Adam? Who's he worried about that's going to kill him? Who else exists at this time? Because up to this time, as we've seen, there ain't nobody else. And Eve, after Cain leaves, bears another son, and she calls and she blesses him because God has replaced her lost son Abel. So there's nobody in between, according to the biblical story. So the questions to ask are, were there people other than Adam and even Cain already in existence at the time of his murder? Was there already some sort of system of laws and rules in place? Were there courts or leaders who judged people for the breaking of societal laws and mores? Was there even a society? Who would kill Cain if indeed only he and his parents were left alive after Abel's murder? This whole passage here seems to indicate one of two things. There were either other descendants of Adam and Eve not mentioned in the passage, or there was a population of people already living and dwelling in the regions outside of Eden who might take Cain's life. Cain was clearly afraid to leave Eden. And so for that purpose, God puts a mark on him so no one would kill him. So whoever would, what was that mark? We don't know. So what's blatantly missing from the account is the meticulous detailing of biblical genealogies. The fact that Cain's wife is never mentioned as being part of his family tree. So there's all kinds of little gaps and little holes in the story that make us start asking questions. What really was going on? Was Jehovah, it wasn't even Jehovah, Elohim, his creation of Adam and Eve, was that strictly his own little world here on earth that he set up for his creation, Adam and Eve and their offspring? Were there offspring of other gods in other places of the world? Was Elohim the God of Adam and Eve and their descendants, but not the God of these other people? These are questions we will probably never fully know answers to, although you look at places like Göbekli Tepe in Turkey. I asked the same question. What the mark meant? Who told them what the mark was? What was the mark that other people would recognize it? Did he send out a memo? Hey, everybody else that's out there, see this mark on this memo? See this thing right here? I put that right. Is that what happened? How do we know what happened? We don't. It's a biblical tale. It's got all the earmarks of a fable, of an allegorical tale that doesn't give us all the details. Maybe they didn't consider other tribes people. That's very possible, Becky. That's very possible. So, I'm sorry, Suze. That's very possible. And that's my question. Are there other tribes? Are there other people? Cain and the other people. So Cain's punishment for killing his brother was banishment from the region of Eden. Remember Adam and Eve? They'd been ousted from the Garden of Eden, not the geographical region. So it was probable that the first family never, ever even wandered very far from God's care and protection. But protection from whom? Another aspect of Cain's punishment was actually a divine protection placed on him. God marked Cain with some visible tattoo or recognizable mark that would let other people know that he wasn't to be touched. Don't fuck with this guy. There would be eye for an eye. There'd be no tooth for a tooth, no blood for blood. Of course, none of that had been written yet in the Mosaic Law. And in the case of Abel's murder, none of that applied. So Cain was merely sent away and marked for protection so he could live out his days as a wanderer in the world. It says in Genesis 4:17, Cain made love to his wife, and she became pregnant and gave birth to Enoch. So now we enter another phase of his banishment, parenthood. Now, before I go that far, I had a diagram where I could show you tonight. But I had in one of the former videos, the former video I did on this, if you look back at my YouTube page, I know it's small. This is rinky-dink. I don't have a way to display it here. But if you look at some of the header graphics, the first part of this, I show a black map, and you see a map of the region. The biblical Eden may have lay. And yet it says that excuse me, I wish I could show this to you, and I can't the way I'm set up right now. Hopefully by next week I'll be able to do this, show you some things during the live broadcast. But the biblical Eden, it says, was surrounded by rivers and streams, and it named them. And let's So I'm going to see if I've got it here. Yeah, I've got the map. I can't show you. Sorry. I'm just going to call it up so I can actually refer to it. Now, you had, of course, if you look at the Middle East today, and you look what is now Iraq, that lays right in the middle of the Euphrates and the Tigris rivers, which run, northeast to southwest, or southeast to northwest. And that's the whole region of Iraq is in there. But just north of that, it says in the biblical account that the Gihon River bordered it on the north, that the Pishon River bordered Eden on the east, and that the Euphrates or the Tigris bordered it on the west and on the south. And you can look at a map today, and you can see these rivers still exist by name anyway. You can also see they've done infrared photography that shows ancient courses that these rivers flowed. And you can see that they're not that far off from what you see nowadays, but they did have a different flow. So if Eden existed, it was the region of Eden was right there between the Gihon River, the Pishon River, the Tigris River, the Euphrates River, which all ran to the south and southwest there, all in that region, which is now what is known as Iraq. It's a region in Iraq. Now, there's somebody who had done a documentary on this, and he actually went to a region in Iraq that he believed was the ancient site of Eden. And it's no fantastical garden now, but what lies there in the valley at its foot of this region is one of the Earth's oldest cities in the Fertile Crescent. And that city is, they were making a point, it is one of the filthiest, polluted, dirty, scummy industrial cities in the region that is there. And it's not a nice place to live because of the pollutants and so on. And he said it was interesting that this city marks, I believe he said that this marked Uruk, the city of Uruk. And that this city was the city that Cain built, or at least in the region of Eden right there, where some of the first settlers out of Eden would have built a city. And it is today one of the dirtiest cities you can find, physically speaking. Not a nice place to live. So it's a very interesting footnote there. Audrey, we'll see you later. Good to see you. And for all those of you joining Rocky in the Situation Room tonight, which comes at 11 o'clock tonight. And so let's see. I want to see what some of you were saying. Toriel Bruce, I'm just seeing your posts here. I think can represent a people, not an actual man, maybe. Same as Abel, a people. You might be onto something there, Toriel. Plus, the original text says Abel was doing human sacrifices. Now, in the original text, I've never found that. I'd appreciate if you've got something you can send me or show me or in the chat room. I'd love to see that. I don't see anywhere in the Hebrew text where it mentions that Abel was sacrificing humans. It said he brought the first fruits of his flocks. Now, is that interpretable? If you say Abel was... That's a broad application, but that's not what the linguistics of the text say. So I'd have to see that, where you're getting that. I'd be very interested in seeing it, as a matter of fact. Maybe you're talking about something in traditional Jewish writings. I don't know for sure. But I'd love to see that. Mother Key says, by the way, she says, I'd love to invoke favor upon all my beautiful souls. Nothing will be broken or stolen. If you need to be healed, I'm sending healing energy, that much unconditional love from my heart. Thank you, Mother Key. I accept that, and I hope others do very heartily. Shannon Kling, good to see you. And some of you others who've wandered in, I haven't said hello to many people tonight. We'll get there. Does Abel count as a human sacrifice? Iowa asks. Not formally. You can say somebody sacrificed themselves for something, or this person became, because of their death, became a sacrifice for a cause. I don't see that here. What I see in the linguistics of the text is that Cain, out of anger, murdered his brother. He didn't sacrifice him. He got rid of him. It's a difference in the language of sacrifice to murder. Somebody, can you have sacrificial murder? Yeah, if you start bending it around and trying to make a definition work. I don't think that's what you have here. In the story itself, you've got a story of a guy who out of anger killed his brother. That's it. There was no sacrifice. So no, I don't think there was sacrifice on the part of Cain sacrificing Abel. So here now, after Cain impregnates his wife and she gives his son, he's moved out, he's in Nod. And by the way, there are some linguistics for the land of Nod too, which equate it to Iraq as well. So it's at this point that, this is a little poetic, the incidental music of our story comes to a scratching, screeching halt as the needle of seeming contradiction is carelessly torn across the record album of biblical history. If Adam, Eve, Cain, and Abel were the only 4 living human beings on earth, well, 3, who was this woman that Cain married? And where did he wander to find her? Theological apologists are going to tell you that this woman and the inhabitants of her region were none other than the descendants of Adam and Eve's other children, who had migrated away from Eden's region over the course of obviously many, many years. And they're also going to purport that Cain and Abel, while being the first 2 sons of that, providing an undefined period of time for the branching out and resettlement of the exponentially multiplied tree of Adamic offspring. Now, these were all the arguments that were given to me when I was in seminary and in Bible school. No, that's okay. Iowa, I get it. I have the same ones. You ask here, Holocaust is a sacrifice, also political religious murder. It's a good question. To whom is the sacrifice being made? And who is making the sacrifice for what purpose? A sacrifice is generally something that is done for the good or betterment of someone else, by someone who is seeking that good and that betterment. So the Holocaust, I don't see that as a sacrifice. I still see that as murder and extermination. What good is supposed to have come from the Holocaust, other than we have resolved as human beings to never let it happen again? And even that is on fine, on a fine thread sometimes. When you read about some of the things with the European Union, even now, 70 years later, 80 years later, some of the things the European Union wants to ban Israel, doing business and so on, that you would have to mark businesses as Jewish. It's a sad story. 100 years from now, could the Holocaust happen again? Yeah, I think so. No matter how much we remember it, never forget it. So I would say the Holocaust, no, I can't see how that was a sacrifice for any good. It was a tragedy. And that word doesn't even match up to what it was. But I get your question, and I understand. I ask similar questions. I ask questions like that all the time, trying to figure out the answers to things. What I was taught was that there may have been a wife that Cain took from extended relatives. But once again, that's not spelled out in the biblical tale. Took them, if they were a cousin, it said it was his cousin, or his second cousin, or his brother's uncle's third daughter. It's not said here in this account. So, in the passage, it says this: Cain was then building a city, and he named it after his son Enoch. To Enoch was born Irad, and Irad was the father of Mehujael, and Mehujael was the father of Methusael, and Methusael was the father of Lamech. Now, the first thing that comes to my mind, Enoch was born to Irad, and Irad was the father of Mehujael. To Enoch, was born Irad. So Enoch had sons. So first, not only do you have Cain going and marrying a woman, who does his son marry that bears him the son Irad? A few years later, did people follow from Eden to go join Cain? That's presupposing there were other people already there in Eden. So no. He goes out, he marries a wife, and you see, whoever wrote this mythology down left a lot of gaping holes. Maybe he thought people weren't going to ask the questions. Maybe they did. So now this line starts producing off of Cain. Lamech, now the great grandson, 4 greats in there, I think, of Enoch, 5 great grandson of Cain. Lamech married 2 women, one named Adah and the other named Zillah. Adah gave birth to Jabal. He was the father of those who live in tents and raise livestock. His brother's name was Jubal. He was the father of all who play stringed instruments and pipes. Zillah also had a son, Tubal-Cain, who forged all kinds of tools out of bronze and iron. Tubal-Cain's sister was Naamah. Lamech said to his wives, Adah and Zillah, "Listen to me. Wives of Lamech, hear my words. I have killed a man for wounding me, a young man for injuring me. If Cain is avenged 7 times, then Lamech 77 times." Now, I don't know what the avenging 7 times was with Cain. But before we move any further from this, I want to comment on all these offspring that are coming from the loins of Cain. So apparently the only other person on earth other than Adam and Eve. Marries a wife, has a son Enoch, who also marries a wife as he grows older, and he has all these offspring. And then 6 generations down, Lamech said, "I've killed the man who injured me." And if Cain's avenged 7 times, Lamech is 77 times. No idea what he's talking about there. No antecedent to that in the story. So now we also have Cain building this city, which is very interesting. Now, before we move further, I'm just going to mention again that it's at this point in the passage where Eve bears a 3rd child, and his name is Seth. And the verse says, Adam made love to his wife again, and she gave birth to a son and named him Seth, saying, God has granted me another child in place of Abel, since Cain killed him. Now, literally what that text is saying, God has granted me another child in place of Abel, who was killed by Cain. Meaning there's no other children in between. That's interesting. But if Cain and Abel are adults, do you think Adam and Eve weren't getting it on during the ensuing years? So maybe there were offspring. We don't know. Did she go, I don't know, how old do you think Cain and Abel are? Would they be in their teens, 20s, their 30s? Would they be 100? Whatever it was, even if we think of the minimum, if Cain and Abel are teenagers when this takes place, capable of fathering children, which Cain does when he goes and marries a wife, would 15 years have gone by, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, without Adam and Eve having another child? I don't know. The text doesn't tell us. So now let's go to east of Eden. Let's travel out there. To what? To the land of Nod. To that place that would eventually be known as Iraq. Other than Adam, Eve, and Cain, and Abel, there are no other members of the Adamic family listed in the Hebrew scriptures at the time of Abel's murder. There's no genealogical record. There are no names given. Nothing. And remember, in the genealogies, when they start tracing back to trace the bloodline that the kinsman redeemer, the Messiah, would then someday come out of, they go all the way back, but they skip Cain, and I've given reasons for that. I don't think he was fully human. But they go to Seth, the third born, and trace the line of humanity back to Seth. Well, what does that tell you? There were no other sons in between. If Adam and Eve had other kids, maybe they were all girls. We don't know. This is no male heir, at least that lived before Seth, for the human line to go back to as a firstborn after Adam. So there's no genealogical record, no names are given, nothing. Banished from Eden, Cain left behind the only two other people mentioned in the Bible being on the earth at that time, Adam and Eve. And he went out into a world void of inhabitants and civilization. He went east to the land of Nod. And once there, the passage tells us that he made love to his wife. Of course, what else would you do after being banished and kicked out into a world void of inhabitants and all civilization? Well, we don't even have the context to think of that. There's nothing else there. There's not even anything to go. You're not going to go out and head east to Nod and go, we'll just find another village. We'll stay in an inn tonight. There's nothing else, according to the story. So, this wife, he either brought with him from Eden, meaning it was one of his sisters, or a cousin, or something like that, not named in the account of the first family, or a woman he met in his wanderings. She in turn bore him a son, whom Cain named Enoch. Of course, she could have been married to him already. What does the passage say? It says that, I just had the passage up here. He made love to his wife. There's just no other member of the family mentioned. Okay. And there in the land of Nod, Cain builds a city. Now, this is very interesting. He leaves Eden. Of course, we've been through this. I'll repeat it again. 3 people there. Leaves, goes out, meets a woman, marries her. There's nothing else in the world to go to. He goes east to Nod, and he builds a city. Well, who's he building a city for? What is the definition of city? And most likely, according to some historians, linguists, it's a wooden enclosure around a few huts in honor of his new son. And that is what the city could translate to in its archaic form. Few huts with a wooden enclosure, like a fort. And he named the city after his son Enoch. Of the subsequent history of this little city, we know very little, but the name of this city we know a deal about. And I hinted at this earlier. Without entering into too much detail regarding the changes in pronunciation, which occur in the course of the development of a language, it seems necessary to point out here that the sound represented, now I covered this a bit off the top of my head. Let's look what I had written down here. The sound represented by the letter N is often reproduced as an R. The CH sound, which terminates the name Enoch, may be replaced by a K or a G, or the GH sound. These sorts of linguistic changes are very common in ancient tongues, and in relation to biblical city mounds or tells, the people living around these cities kept the named places fairly intact over the passage of millennia. And this revealed a very important city in antiquity that appeared under the name Uruk. And a study of cuneiform soon revealed that this could equally well be pronounced Unuk, which was recognized as identical with the biblical word Enoch. So Enoch to Unuk to Uruk. What's more interesting, get this. Now, this is where I love this stuff. I hate mathematics, but this is like the math of history. It is logical and it puts things together and it sheds light. To me, this is fantastic when you start looking at this stuff. What's more interesting is the name of the city Uruk, Unuk, became synonymous with the word city. And not simply a mere city, but a city of great historical importance. The word in its raw form, Unuk, Uruk, actually means the first city. And now the writer of Genesis is traditionally considered to be Moses, who lived during the mid-1400s BCE. There are also many later scribal changes to his manuscripts. While it's a fact that Moses lived roughly from 1526 to 1406 BC, he mentions the city of Pithom and Ramses, which didn't exist until 200 years later. Now, I don't think it was Moses, obviously, that wrote that. Later scribes wrote it in. But he does mention the city built by Cain as being named Enoch or Uruk, Unuk was the city. And so this is what's really cool about this, is you're looking at ancient linguistics to see the name of the city actually still exists today. How about the Arabs? Mother Key says how they came into the picture, since the Jews were who got created first, and then Sarah, Abram, Rebecca, who was the Arabian maid. Well, according, of course, to the biblical story, the Arabs were the offshoot of Jacob and Esau. Esau was the father of the Arabic tribes. Remember the big schism between the brothers, Jacob and Esau. Jacob became synonymous with Israel, the same name. And Esau became the father of the Arabic tribes. So it's interesting stuff. Mythology that doesn't even make sense. Well, I don't know that it doesn't make sense. It's biblical mythology. If two brothers, if the 12 sons of Jacob became representative of the 12 tribes of Israel later on, why couldn't there be sons of Esau that became father tribes of the Arabs? They're all related. They're all Semitic peoples. So it's an interesting question, though, Mother Key. The Babel mythology is a lot earlier than this. The Babel mythology would have gone back long before. Well, hold it. Long before Jacob and Esau, not before Cain and Abel. The Babel stuff took place after Cain and Abel in that time, but it took place long before Abrahamic culture, or Abraham, coming out of Ur of the Chaldees. Remember Ur? The Bible says he came out of Ur of the Chaldees. Uruk, and Unuk, these cities. This is the place where Abraham was supposed to come out. And this is, again, Abraham was even post-flood. But so was the Tower of Babel. There was the flood. I think, if I'm getting my chronology right, Babel happened after the flood because God split the languages up, according to the mythology. So it's interesting stuff. 12 houses of the zodiac, 12 apostles, mythology all takes on meta thinking. You're right, Iowa X. Islam was created as an opposition of Christianity by Jesuits. I always thought Islam was created by Muhammad. There is historical, I wrote about this, as a matter of fact, how Muhammad was part of an aristocratic family. And to oversimplify it, he went to Mecca, where he worshipped 290 different gods at Mecca. And he had two men that were mentors of his. One happened to be Jewish, another one was Christian. And they both advised him, if you want to unify, he was very concerned about unifying all the splintered Arabic clans. They said, if you want to unify, one of the things you got to do, you got to go monotheistic, just like the other two Abrahamic religions. And now, mind you, Islam was not a religion at this point, but they had 290 gods. So what did Muhammad do? Muhammad eliminated 289 of those gods, pulled the chief god, I think his name was Hamal, out, renamed him Allah. And he said, Allah will be our list of demigods, angelics, demonics, and things like that. And so Muhammad created, literally, like Moses did with Judaism, he crafted Islam out of whole cloth. He created Allah out of, I want to say the god's name was Hamad or Hamal. Something like that. I don't have it right in front of me. And he, by eliminating all the other gods, a monotheistic system. And when he did this, he created something that had not existed before. And this was man-made, just like I believe Moses did when he codified Judaism for the first time. Both made these religions from whole cloth. So I don't think it was Jesuits, unless there was a Jesuit that was one of the mentors. I didn't read that he was a Jesuit, the Christian mentor of Muhammad. 7 colors, 7 planets, 7 keys. Yeah, all different things, 7 chakras. Let's see. Joey says, Scotty, too smart sometimes. I have to listen at least 2 times to understand. And I got to tell you something. Thank you, Joey. I also have to tell you there's a hell of a lot of smart people in this chat room. Mother Key, I want to see more of your information. And somebody else earlier gave some great information, whose name I hadn't really seen before. Hey, Amanda, by the way. Nice to see you, Amanda B. Glad you're here. And so, yeah, Mother Key, there's all this stuff that we can look at. I'm not going to look at it tonight. I haven't researched it. I haven't studied it out. Things I may have, getting into that, I'm going to start talking about things I don't have any knowledge of yet. The Jesuits were the CIA of the Vatican. Yeah, that much I knew. So, and back when Muhammad created Islam, I didn't see it as a Jesuit invention at all. It was an invention of Muhammad's at the behest of his Jewish and Christian mentors, who said, here's the way you got to go. Go monotheistic. So now we're talking about Cain building the city, the land of Nod, and so on. Now we're out here in the land of Nod. What happens? Nod is the Hebrew root of the verb to wander. And it's obvious an etymological causation that's intended to explain the wandering nomadic lifestyle of Cain. And he went out east to Nod, east to the Nod, the land of wandering. And his future putative descendants, the Kenites. They were wanderers, it says, nomadic. This sort of play on words is typical of rabbinic writings. It suggests that this is a later scribal interpretation, which was more than likely inserted in to suggest that Cain's descendants were without any kind of territory of their own. Because it's a rabbinic writing. Rabbis didn't exist at the time of Moses when he wrote this. So in other words, nomadic. Additionally, the Hebrew language didn't exist prior to the time of Abraham, who lived some 4,000 years after the time of Cain. The language Cain and his descendants would have spoken was probably a Nilotic Cushitic language. It's kind of closer to Old Arabic or Dedanite. So now you've got mythology plus history divided by spirituality equals wonder. Our tiny corner of the universe may have been visited thousands of times in the past. A few billion years ago, so said Carl Sagan in Intelligent Life in the Universe, written in 1966. 2 years, by the way, before von Daniken's Chariots of the Gods. And co-authored with I.S. Shklovsky, at least one of these visits may have occurred in historical times. So said Carl Sagan. Sagan, who was both an astronomer, an exobiologist, as well as an established atheist and a reasoned skeptic, theorized that Earth may have been visited by various galactic civilizations. Did you think that's where I was going to go with this tonight? Many times during Earth's primordial past. He also insisted that it was not entirely out of the realm of possibility that extraterrestrial artifacts maintained within our solar system to provide continuity for successive expeditions. What do you think of that? Where's your head go when I jump into that? When I say Carl Sagan is the first person I quote as making statements about that. We're getting out of the realm of the Abrahamic religions and out of the biblical tale and into something completely different now. Marduk and his family, says Mother Key, and the family Enki and Enlil. Maybe so. That is possible. And what we have to do is we have to start breaking all of that down and looking into it and finding out, is this what may have happened? Now, this hypothesis is coming from as respected a scientist as Carl Sagan, acted as a catalyst for many in the ufological community and field to theorize that humankind may have been the result of alien seeding or extraterrestrial genetic interference. And despite scientific conventional theory regarding the origin of species, there is still no real proof as to how humans got here in the first place. The great Darwinian missing link, which we talked about, was it at the beginning of this series last time? This great missing link still, frankly, is missing. So what scientists are doing, in all reality, is simply incorporating exponential leaps of faith to fill in all these gaps in between stages of the ascendancy of human evolution. In a sense, science creating a mythology of its very own, in that it uses the human imagination to fill in the gaps in the theorized sequence of human ascendancy, from primates into higher levels of sapiens. I'm going to take a drink after that one. Pardon me, that almost went down the wrong throat. So now even the DNA linkages that we once thought existed between apes and humans has been dramatically reduced. In more recent DNA studies, where the once 95% similarity between humans and chimps has been reduced to a woeful 67% and even lower. And now, while the evidence, which by the way, so much of that is essential, it's beginning to look as if the link to primates is becoming less and less an active, provable theory on the genetic level. The missing link between humans and our primate cousins may very well have been DNA provided by somebody else, provided from visitors from another world. What do you think about that? When we start thinking of Cain and Cain marrying another woman that shouldn't have existed, building a city for people that shouldn't have been there, what are we talking about? Does this open up the door for alien speculation? Now, I'm not saying that's what happened, but this is what I wonder about. These are the questions I want to open up. Throat coat, Scotty. Thank you, Michelle. Yeah. Is that a beer you've got there? Let's see. Mother Key says Enki had sons from earthly women named Sudra, Noah, and why he and Noah had favor in God's eyes. Possible. He built the boat and didn't fit in there with the whole Bronx Zoo. My thinking was DNA lab. Maybe. Did swallow wrong. Sorry. So, it's gnawing my throat right now. You know, when you do that, take a drink of something or eat something, and you almost swallow it wrong, or it just sticks, and then you're like, for 20 minutes, you're like, feel like something's in my throat. Anunnaki DNA. See, this is all possible. All this is, by the way, Mother Key, is a different way of looking at creation than, say, biblical creation or scientific creation. It's another theory. Now, science has got a whole lot built up behind it, and I'm speaking in oversimplistic terms. Does that mean we should ignore the possibility of this theory existing? And is it even a theory? It's not even really a hypothesis unless we have all kinds of solid material to back that theory, so we can start hypothesizing about it. It's a notion, it's an idea, it's a belief. Do we know it took place? No, we don't. We also don't know Adam and Eve took place. What we do know, we can trace scientifically. But there's so many gaps in that, it almost takes faith to string them together on the same chord. Taking some DNA from some animals to adapt to breathing Earth atmosphere. Yeah, very possibly. What was one of the more recent books in the last 20 years found in the Dead Sea Scrolls? I think the last 10 years was the Book of Giants. And in this book, it shows all kinds of, I didn't prepare to speak about that tonight, so I don't have any of the information in front of me. Going off the top of my head, there are all these genetic experiments being conducted by the gods in the Book of Giants, which was part of the Dead Sea Scrolls, ancient biblical texts that say there were experiments. It was like, now they didn't speak of it in scientific terms, laboratory terms, and so on. They spoke about how, they would try to graft a man's torso on a lion, or a bird's head on a pig, or whatever it might be. There were all these experiments that they went through in creation. The ancients, the ancient gods, So it's very interesting. I've got to study up on that. It's been a long time since I've looked at that stuff. But I would like to say, hey, kitten, how you doing? I'd like to look into that. Our brain, our nails, our skin, hair belong to the snake or serpent. And yeah, all of that, Mother Key. So it's very interesting. We can throw out these very simplistic statements on all of these things. You start to see the holes in the mythology and say, how can those be plugged? Or is there something else altogether that should exist there? Let's go back to this land of Nod. I started talking about this DNA provided from very possibly visitors from another world. So now you look at the serpent in the garden. And folks, I still have a bit to go on this. I don't think we'll finish this tonight. Maybe we'll hit it tomorrow. Why don't we leave it there for right now, for tonight? And I'm going to leave you to ponder this idea of alien interference or extraterrestrial interference. Let me just say that even in a biblical sense, God is extraterrestrial. He's not of this planet. When you look at the story of the Nephilim, the Elohim coming down, the sons of the Elohim, the B'nai Ha-Elohim, the sons of God, who came down and intermingled with the daughters of men, that is extraterrestrial interference in the DNA of the human race. It's mentioned in the Bible, this extraterrestrial DNA. So it's an interesting topic. I have been very fond of saying, I did several episodes with History International at the time, back in 2020. And I haven't done a great bit of distancing myself from that show, from the notion, mostly because I saw some of the proponents of that show as being too fucking goofy to want to adhere to the precepts they were setting forward. And so I distanced myself from it. And I said, I am not an ancient alienist. And I'm not. That does not mean I do not believe there was some kind of interference in the bloodline of humanity from the outside. Hippies give everything a bad name. Yeah, damn hippies. They wear bell-bottom jeans and they let their hair grow down to their asses. And they come up with weird ideas. So, yeah. You're going to go with the Admiral Adama leading us to Earth in the Battlestar. I liked that when they came out with the second Battlestar. That ending, to me, you knew it was kind of coming. But I thought that was pretty damn cool. So, let's see. Mother Key says the scrolls were discovered in 1948, but translated and printed only 10 years ago. That's right. And that's when you started seeing the Book of Giants came out. So Christ told that we should be wise as serpents and innocent, harmless as a dove. Yes, he did. And we can get into that, what that all means another time. What I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap it up now, so we're done at 10:30, 11:30 out east. That'll give you about a half an hour to cool down until Rocky Stucci's Situation Room comes on in about 30 minutes. I will not be on the show tonight and the rest of this week. Oh, I take that back. Tomorrow night, we are live, broadcasting live with Jeffrey Dougherty, who will be up here in the Great North. And we're doing a live broadcast from the depot in Hastings, Minnesota. So if you happen to be local to the area, Hastings is about 45 minutes to an hour south of the Minneapolis-St. Paul area. Small town, River City. And we're going to be at a little bar there doing a live broadcast, talking on paranormal and stuff. So it'll be very interesting and a hell of a lot of fun to go down there. So we'll see you tomorrow night. I think we're going at 8 p.m. Just watch for announcements in case that changes, since I've talked to Rocky about it last. And it should be a fun show tomorrow night. So I want to thank you for being here. TT, love you too, brother. Good night, everybody. Thanks for being here. Thanks for your participation. You've enjoyed a Scotty Roberts marathon today. Been watching a lot of your previous presentations. Thank you, Melanie. That's very cool. I appreciate that. Nice to have you here, too. So, folks, see you here tomorrow night, a little earlier, and with Jeff and Rocky in tow. You have a good night. Talk to you soon. Love you. I want to thank you for taking your time to spend your time with me. Means a lot to me. Good night.